We know very little about Peter. One thing we know is that he was married. So the guy who is seen traditionally as the first pope was married, which is an interesting commentary on celibacy. And we know that because Jesus goes and heals Peter's mother-in-law. That's in the Gospels. We know that he was a fisherman. We know he was from Galilee. There's a great passage from the Gospel of Luke where Peter and his friends have been fishing all night. And Jesus says, take out your boat. We're going out to fish. And, Peter, who was a professional commercial fisherman, probably rolled his eyes and said, what does this carpenter know about fishing? But for some reason, he goes out and fishes. His net is filled with so much fish that he can barely pull them on the boat. Then they have to call other boats to sort of help them up. And Peter, in a very beautiful way, falls down on his hands and knees and says a very strange thing in the face of this miracle. He says, depart from me, Lord, I'm a sinful man. And I've always thought that is exactly how we feel in the face of the divine, in the face of God. I am not worthy. It's not Peter saying, yeah, take me, look at the great miracles we've done. It's someone who feels so in touch and understands so much their own humanity and their own flaws that they feel unworthy. And yet, what Jesus says to that is, follow me, and I will make you a fisher of men. And so it's Jesus understanding that it's Peter's humanity and his humility that will make him a great leader. As one person said to me once, Peter was weak enough to be the leader of the apostles. I've always liked to think that somehow Peter knew about Jesus and so he was ready. But it's an amazing thing to think of Peter just dropping his nets and following Jesus. And I often tell people that when we think of that story of the nets, we can think of the nets as anything that kind of entangles us in life. And so when Jesus asks us to drop our nets, obviously most of us aren't fishermen, but what does it mean to drop the things that entangle us to enable us to follow Jesus more perfectly? At one point in the Gospels, Jesus says, who do you say that I am? Which must have freaked the disciples out a little bit. And you can hear from their answers, they're sort of struggling. And some people say, you're Elijah, come back. Some people say, you're John the Baptist. Other people say, you're this, you're that. And what they're doing is they're saying, what they think and the kinds of things that they've been struggling with. And they've seen Jesus do miracles and preach these amazing things. And finally, Peter says, you're the Messiah. And Jesus says, well, you didn't come up with this yourself. God has revealed it to you. And so I'm going to call you Rock. You're the rock on which I will build my church. But that's the part of the story everybody knows. A lot of scripture scholars, though, say that when Jesus gives him that name, Peter, or Kephas in Greek, which means rock, it's not only the rock upon which I will build my church, but he's kind of giving him a nickname, Rocky, because of his sort of angular character. He's not exactly a smooth guy. So not only is it a sort of theological comment, it's, according to some people, Jesus making a bit of a play on Peter's essential character, which I think shows Jesus' sense of humor. The great Scottish scripture scholar William Barclay said that there were reasons that Jesus chose fishermen. And if you think about it, there are some qualities that fishermen have that make for a good disciple. So, for example, if you're a good fisherman or fisherwoman, you have to be very patient, like a good disciple. A good fisherman knows how to fit the bait to the fish, the same way a good disciple would know what kind of approach would work. The good fisherman would stay out of the way. You can't let the fish see where you are. The same way a good preacher might stay out of the way and let Christ's message come through. A good fisherman has to be fearless, in case of a storm, something like that. And you think of Peter being someone like that, but Peter is also not someone who is perfect either. And I think anyone who even reads the Gospels at a superficial level will see that Peter is always getting something wrong. Jesus says, I have to suffer, and Peter says, no, you can't suffer. And Jesus even says to him, get behind me, Satan. Not that Peter's Satan, but that Peter is trying to lead Jesus away from his mission. This man who Jesus picks to be the leader is a very weak person, in a sense. And I think it's not till the end of the story that most Christians realize that one of the reasons Jesus picks Peter is for his very weakness. Peter, as the Franciscan writer Richard Rohr says, shows that we come to God often not by doing right, but by doing wrong. There is that scene in the Gospels where Jesus says, "You will deny me 3 times." And, I used to think of it as Jesus kind of being able to tell the future, sort of an almost magical power that Jesus had. But now I think that Jesus was such a good judge of character, he must have been, that as with people that we know very well, he knew that Peter was going to do this. It's like someone we know who sort of continues to do the wrong thing over and over again. But very beautifully, in the Gospel of John, at the end, when Jesus says, "Do you love me?" 3 times, Scripture scholars say that each of those 3 times that Jesus is saying, "Do you love me?" is to counterbalance the 3 times that Peter denies Jesus. And it's very beautiful because he gives him those 3 times to make things up. And I think it's really only then that Peter understands what it is to be a disciple. I think Peter reminds us that it's okay to be human. It's not being perfect. It's not being someone without flaws. It's being someone who knows their humanity enough to know that they have to rely on God. And that is not such a bad message to carry to the ends of the earth, is it?